The Master Thief strikes on the Master System and bringing some learning with her. This is Sega Masters.
Where in the world is
Carmen Sandiego?
Steal their soul in South Korea, make it let it come right up from the Red Sea to Greenland. They'll be singing.
The good news is we have something other than an arcade port this time around. Indeed, we have something different on tap that ends up being two firsts for the Master System simultaneously. We're looking at Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, a US exclusive title which is indeed based on the long-running series of educational computer games. That's right, educational games are hitting the Master System for the first time, but that's not all. Believe it or not, this title also marks a milestone in this series as we finally have a Sega Master System cartridge published in the Western market by a third-party company. It's a well-known fact that independent third-party companies were vital to a console having a diverse library, yet up to this point Sega had attempted to build up the Master System catalog single-handedly, without any help from outside publishers. And thus far their lineup has been less than stellar, outside of a few gems such as Phantasy Star. Meanwhile, the Nintendo Entertainment System was benefiting from various outside publishers such as Capcom, Konami, Tecmo, and others, supplying it with a wide variety of software, including some of the all-time classics, while Sega's console was seemingly left out in the cold as far as third-party labels were concerned. Much has been made about the rather restrictive agreements these companies signed with Nintendo that forced them to all but ignore competing platforms, denying Sega gamers the chance to see what possibly could have been contributed to the Master System. Unfortunately, the runaway success of the NES drew most, if not all, the publishers to Nintendo's side regardless of whatever demands they'd have to grin and bear, leaving almost no one willing to join forces with Sega. But at the 1988 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, Sega announced they had finally signed a third-party publisher to contribute games for the Master System, and that lucky company turned out to be Parker Brothers, the well-known toy and board game brand name who is no stranger to video games. In fact, Parker Brothers was a rather prominent name during the initial video game boom of the early 1980s, as they produced a number of cartridges of varying quality for the Atari 2600, Intellivision, ColecoVision, and others, mostly either arcade ports or movie tie-ins. The shakeout of the video game market in 1984 convinced Parker to pull out of video games entirely, until the agreement with Sega marked their re-entry into the industry after a near 4-year absence. Thing is, Parker Brothers just happened to be owned by Tonka, Sega's distribution partner in the US during this time, which is probably the only reason they were willing to side with Sega instead of joining Nintendo's stable like everybody else. Plus, they would only contribute a paltry 3 games for the Master System, all of which were based on old computer programs. Once Sega's partnership with Tonka ended at the end of 1989, so did Parker's run with Sega's console. Parker's first offering for the Master System is something of an odd choice, an adaptation of Broderbund's famous edutainment title that's been a mainstay on various home computers since it debuted in 1985. Originally designed and written by Gene Portwood and Lauren Elliott, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego presented kids with a fun detective-style game in an effort to help them learn world geography. It became a massive hit with young and older gamers alike, spawning quite a few sequels as well as other media, including a long-running children's game show on PBS and an animated series on Fox. It's anyone's guess why Parker decided to bring Carmen Sandiego to the Master System, given how edutainment titles aren't exactly a welcome presence on consoles. For the longest time, various publishers aimed to show the parents of prospective consumers how video game consoles could be educational tools and not just time-killing amusements. Since these titles were made for the younger set in mind, they mostly melded simple learning exercises or multiple-choice quizzes with shallow arcade action, and were quite dull and tedious as a result. And now we find Parker trying to ignore that trend with this Master System version of Carmen Sandiego. Those expecting this adaptation to faithfully follow the text-based format of its computer parent are in for a surprise, and not necessarily a bad one. The premise is unchanged from the computer game as the Villains International League of Evil, led by Master Thief Carmen Sandiego, is causing a global crime wave by stealing valuable artifacts from cities around the world. As the newest member of the Acme Detective Agency, You're tasked with solving this problem by recovering the loot and bringing Carmen and her followers to justice, one case at a time. When you first boot up the cartridge, you're given the option of choosing your skill level before diving headlong into your sleuthing career with your first assignment, which this teletype machine slowly spells out. These scenes can be quite laborious to sit through, but can be sped up by holding down button 2. Anyway, you're given the lowdown on which national treasure was just stolen by the Vile crooks, and in this example we learned that a prize stamp collection belonging to the Regent of San Marino was just pilfered. We also learned it's a male suspect at the scene, though Carmen does employ female crooks as well. Your mission is obviously to recover this treasure by tracking the criminal responsible down across the globe and ultimately arresting him. You're also given a strict deadline of just 7 days to complete your mission, meaning you must have the criminal apprehended by 5 p.m. on Sunday. You then jet over to the scene of the crime to begin picking up your target's trail and given a quick factoid about your destination along the way. Thing is, the developers probably didn't trust console gamers would go for the original computer version's text-based interface and felt the game needed to be more video game-esque to fit on a dedicated console. Here you're presented with a side-scrolling view of a street, and you control a detective sprite which can move around, plus you can even jump and duck, almost like a bare-bones platformer. Regardless, the cart still follows the computer version's basic outline. Each city has 3 buildings you can visit to speak with witnesses and get clues to where your target might have departed to next, as well as some information about the culprit himself, including hair color, hobbies, and so forth, which you need to pay attention to. Every building you visit causes 1 or 2 hours to tick off the clock, and with only a limited allotment of hours to solve the case, it's best not to waste too much time gathering more clues than necessary. Once you feel like you've done enough interrogating, you head back to the airport and pick your next destination from a small selection, hoping to get a step closer to your quarry. Just like the computer versions, the Master System cartridge was originally shipped with a detective's almanac, which was basically a mini encyclopedia that contained facts about the 30 cities and countries that might be visited during the course of the game. This allowed you to research which location should be your next stop based on the clues you received from the locals, at least in days before Google. In any case, you fly over to whatever destination you choose to interrogate more locals and obtain more clues, which naturally requires several hours of travel time depending on the distance. As in the original version, you'll know you're on the right trail when you're ambushed by one of Carmen's henchmen in certain cities, but in this case he tosses a knife in your direction that you must dodge, either by jumping over it or ducking under it. If you do get hit by the projectile, you'll be forced to sit out several hours to recover from the assassination attempt before resuming your sleuthing. On top of that, your gumshoe requires sleep every evening and will shut down at 9 p.m. for 9 hours of rest, further encouraging you to budget your available time wisely. And that is pretty much all the gameplay this cart offers, walking around and searching for clues while dodging the occasional knife, all while being fed a steady diet of geography facts throughout your mission. While the format change from text-based menus to Super Carmen Brothers may be a bit jarring for gumshoes who love the original versions, this card actually succeeds for the most part in putting a different spin on the Carmen Sandiego formula while keeping the spirit of your computer games intact. Granted, this card has very little presentation-wise, but what's there is put to good use. The vibrantly colored visuals are confined to the upper half of the screen and consist mainly of decent yet sparse backgrounds that don't feature much more than the expected landmarks in the distance. The lower half houses the game text, including the conversations with the locals, who are depicted by some rather goofy portraits. This card also features a bare minimum of audio, with a few sound effects and tones when something happens, and the only music being the title screen theme. The action may get slightly repetitive, but the original version's fun and addictive gameplay thankfully shines through in this adaptation. Gathering clues and solving a case somehow keeps you engaged, just as in the original, and the clock gives it an urgency rarely found in other edutainment titles. Though the controls can feel a little clunky at times, especially when dodging projectiles, moving your character around is not difficult, and you even have a run button to speed things along. Amazingly enough, this cart's formula would actually be emulated by a few other console-style edutainment titles. Most notably Mindscape's Carmen Sandiego wannabe Mario is Missing that's found on the Nintendo platforms. Following the clues correctly will eventually lead you to where your target is hiding, which the locals will tip off. The caveat is you can't actually have the criminal apprehended without the proper arrest warrant. This is obtained by using the phone booth at the end of the street to call headquarters and putting together the hints to the thief's identity you gathered over the course of your investigation. At least 3 hints are needed to get a positive idea on which member Carmen's gang to obtain the warrant for. Once you finally corner the thief, you'll quickly discover your quarry is packing heat as he shoots bullets back at you. This standoff is basically you avoiding the bullets, just like the knives, and keeping the criminal engaged until the police arrive at the scene. These showdowns just come off as an unnecessary attempt to add more juice to a game that didn't really need it, and can also lead to some frustrating moments since you can't protect yourself. Getting hit with a bullet will severely penalize you on the clock, and if you're close to the deadline, one incorrect move can force you to watch as the remaining time is burned off, causing you to unfairly fail the mission. Should you survive long enough for the cops to show up and have the warrant for the right suspect, the crook will be escorted to prison and you'll have solved the case. Then it's back to the teletype machine to receive your congratulations from the chief for a job well done, and maybe even a promotion to the next skill level along with it. Sadly, you don't get any time to bask in your accomplishment as you're immediately presented with your next assignment. And so the game goes as you take out Carmen's gang one by one and advancing ranks along the way, ultimately working your way up to possibly capturing the ringleader herself. Unfortunately, there's no way to record your progress, not even a password, so you'll have to play through all the missions in one sitting. Thankfully, you can start right at the highest skill level that gives you a minimum of cases to solve before reaching the ending. So, what to ultimately make of Carmen Sandiego on the Master System? It does an admirable job of bringing the computer classic into the video game realm with the addictive gameplay intact, and the various combinations of places, treasures, and suspects ensures a fresh case after every round with very little repetition. At the same time, it's not for everybody, and will certainly bore gamers who are merely looking for some arcade action and not interested in learning about world geography. And it is hard to ignore that this adaptation is a little obsolete, as more faithful versions of the computer original were released on the 16-bit consoles 4 years later, giving nostalgic gumshoes a chance to experience the classic in all its text-based glory. But for what it is, Carmen Sandiego does a solid job on the Master System of making learning fun, and while it probably won't change the minds of those who disdain edutainment games in general, you might find yourself enjoying it more than you think. Besides, as far as edutainment games go, you could do much worse.